In the last 4 years, slowly but surely, the number of solo runs uploaded on this channel increased, and I always thought one day I would try to rank them based on their difficulty. I wanted to make a first ranking after 10 runs, but here I am, nearing run number 20, so it's about time to make this video. So far, these are the Pokémon I used for my Emerald Hardcore solo runs. Proceeding in chronological order, I'll give to each one of them a score that reflects how easily they were able to beat the game. And since I want this ranking to actually make sense, I came up with a score system that should coherently evaluate every run. My approach to these challenges evolved throughout the years, and this brought up issues I'll address later, but overall these are the aspects I focus on. Number of resets, how many times a Pokémon had to resort to OP items in moves like Double Team, Substitute and Leftovers, and finally the Titanizer Double Battle. Every Pokémon is gonna start with 100 points. Depending on how many times I had to reset versus an opponent, the score will go down as follows. -1 point for each of the first 10 resets, -0.6 for the subsequent 5 resets, and -0.4 points for the 5 resets after. No point will be subtracted beyond the 20th reset. Basically, up to 15 points can be subtracted for every opponent, and the first 10 resets weight more than the rest. As far as moves and items go, I subtract 3 points for every battle I had to rely on Hidden Power and 15 points for every time I resorted to Double Team or Leftovers. Don't worry, these two are not very common, especially later on. There are also 2 ways to add points. If a Pokémon managed to win the run using Substitute no more than 3 times, then it gets a nice boost of 5 points. But the bigger one depends on the Titanizer Double Battle. Those familiar with my solo runs know that I allow to use 2 Pokémon for this fight only, but it happened quite a few times that a Pokémon was able to pull off a 2v1, and that will be rewarded with 15 extra points. Okay, that's basically it. I hope I didn't lose too many of you with all this talking about points. Before starting with Source Kit though, in case you are not familiar with my runs, what you need to know is that I play with level caps, I allow myself to train more than 1 Pokémon of the chosen species, items and tutor moves are infinite. Now I'm really done. Let's begin the ranking. So, Source Kit was my first solo run and I remember it being atrocious. But atrocious isn't really a precise value, isn't it? As I said, my approach to these challenges changed during the years. What you're seeing on screen is the video of the Source Kit run, and not only it's not so pretty, but you see there's no reset counter. There's not even an EV and IV chart on the right. So how could I ever rank this run without replaying it completely with the same Pokémon and the same strategies I used 4 years ago? Yeah, that's what I did. And it was painful. Not just due to the sheer amount of difficulty, but also because I now know so many more things about this game and I feel I would play a lot of fights much better. However, this is not me revisiting every run I played, so I'll have to stick to what I did at the time. Let's cut to the score. It's 46. No wait, -46. Yeah, that went quite below 0. And the main reason is that I used Leftovers way too freely and even had to rely on Double Team against Norman and Wallace. Those are by themselves -65 points. Add that Source Kit is not a good Pokémon and generally struggled a lot and yeah. Surprisingly enough, Source Kit didn't use Substitute more than 3 times and was even able to beat Titanizer in a 2v1. So, despite a depressing final score, it got every extra point available. Anyway, let's continue with Numel. Just like for Source Kit, I had to replay this run completely to be able to properly give it a score. And I'll say it right now, I replayed every run up to the Seaviper one. But back to Numel, I really liked this run and I was very proud of beating it without using Double Team once. However, Leftovers were used twice, I used Substitute a lot, I absolutely couldn't beat Titanizer in a 2v1, and generally speaking, there were a lot of tough opponents, especially in the Pokémon League. But hey, Numel destroyed Watson, that's such an annoying fight most of the times, and prevailed over the infamous region with too much water as a ground fire Pokémon. And this with a score of 7.6, so I'm happy to see it at least above 0. Cacnea was very interesting. It played an amazing early game with basically just growth and absorb, and the Pokémon League was a breeze as well. I only had to reset once to Sydney, and then I beat the final gauntlet on the second try. Remember, I don't save between Elite Four members, so that's very impressive. But Cacnea struggled a lot versus the rival. Without decent coverage, playing versus the rival starter wasn't easy, and due to its poor coverage, Cacnea also had to rely on Hidden Power for 8 times. That's an insanely high number, and I believe it's after this run that I started to actively avoid using Hidden Power even when it was honestly necessary, because I didn't want every run to feel the same. There was one fight I used leftovers and probably it wasn't necessary, but again I refrained from changing the strategies I used at the time. At least the leftovers penalty is counterbalanced by an amazing 2v1 against Eliza, so Cacnea is able to land a strong score of 56. I remember hating the Snorunt run with a passion, and replaying it wasn't honestly so bad after all. The combination of Stab Icy Wind plus Ice Beam was solid and allowed Snorunt to play around its rather low speed. And yes, it's true that defeating Flannery took like 8 resets, even with Hidden Power, but Snorunt also pulled off one of my all-time favorite strategies, the Mimic Flail Spike Sweep against one. Reset-wise, the Pokémon League was above average with 13 resets across all Elite Four members and a first-time win on Wallace. The price for it was a lot of substitute, a couple of leftovers, and even a double team setup against Wallace. So that's probably why I remember hating this run. It had a rather disappointing ending. Anyway, with no 2v1 versus Data Liza to boost it, Snorunt ends with a score of 18. The Gulpin run is one I hate to love. I'll say it right away, the final score is -36.6, which is horrible. But let's go in order for this one. Gulpin has no resets versus the first 2 gems and even beats the rival Smart Stomp in Slate Pot on the first try. Then it suffers a lot versus Watson, where it has to unironically rely on Rock Smash to defeat Magneton and only gets past him after 11 resets. After that it's all easy until Norman, where it has to anchor Spinda into Theta Dance while doing a disgusting double team setup. Only took 1 reset, but it felt horrible. Then Gulpin's incredibly good moveset allows it to reach Victory Road with only 5 more resets. But Wally, of all things, gave a reality check with its Magneton. At least I did not have to use Rock Smash, but the only way to defeat it was Dynamic Punch. And I don't need to say anything more other than it took 8 resets. And finally, the Pokémon League had so many cool and unique strategies, I still remember loving coming up with them. Like, have you ever one-shot a Warrain with a full power spit out? With that said, I don't know if I just got unlucky or what, but every Elite Four member took 20 resets, for a -15 points each. And the champion himself only fell after 7 unsuccessful attempts. On top of all these resets, add that leftovers were used against Glacia and Wallace, and you get the abysmal score you've seen, -36.6. Overall, a somehow very fun run that I'd hate to play again. So the Shuppet run is weird, because, and this applies to the Gulpin one too, I didn't have a full run as a reference to replay it. Let me explain. The Gulpin and Shuppet videos were the first ones where I used my voice, and since I wasn't confident enough with my English and I didn't have a proper recording setup, I came up with a weird format where I would introduce the battles versus the gym leaders and the Elite Four, and then I'd let the fight play without commentary. The problem is that I have nothing that showcases all the battles in between. No rivals, no Team Magma and Aqua, no Wally. So to include these two runs in the ranking, I had to cover the missing parts with some new strategies. With that said, the Shuppet run was amazing. To give you an idea, it's the first run where there's no double team and no leftovers. Hidden Power was used just once, and Tate and Liza were defeated in a 2v1 with a very cool Imprison skill swap strategy. I do have two problems with the Shuppet run. One is that they forced the Flannery fight without Hidden Power, resulting in more than 20 resets, and two, I got downright unlucky. There were two strategies that involved using Thunder that systematically gave horrible results. And believe me, I'm still salty about losing to the last champion's Pokémon due to two Thunder misses in a row. Still, Shuppet gets a final score of 46.8, which is outstanding for a Pokémon below 300 base stats. Bagon is good. It's so good that it would be faster to say what went wrong during its run. I had to use leftovers once during the league, there was some bad crit luck versus a few gym leaders, I lost once to Archie due to confused raid shenanigans, and that's it. Sure, it didn't manage to beat Tate and Liza in a 2v1, but it never ever had to rely on Hidden Power, and most importantly, it swept the Pokémon League on the very first try. Even with no good stab move, having Dragon Dance, Brick Break and Double Edge with Rockhead as an ability is just that good. A score of 76 reflects just how good of a Pokémon is Bagon. A very solid run. Trico was the first starter I played in the series, and I remember expecting it to be the worst out of the three. I guess the final scores will give a definitive answer on the matter, but what I can say right now is that Trico is terrible against quite a few opponents. When it comes to the gym leaders, Trico made me reset 10 times versus Broly and 20 times versus both Watson and Winona. To give you an idea of how brutal this run was, in the early game my best option was unironically Cut. And since I decided to not rely on Hidden Power against Winona, I ended up using Screech and Focus Punch to deal with her Skarmory. However, the late game was actually decent and Trico barely used the substitute, managed to win against Tate and Liza in a 2v1, and even the Pokémon League wasn't that bad. It took 26 resets total, which is not terrible when you consider there's no saving between battles. Sadly, during the run I had to use Hidden Power quite a lot, 4 times to be precise, and that led to a final score of 32. Not the worst, but I would have wished to see the coolest starter a bit higher. You can imagine some of these runs were a bit frustrating to put together. That's why at a certain point I decided to start covering the one-form Pokémon, to relax a bit and enjoy an easier game from time to time. Seviper was the first one, and let me tell you that playing a Pokémon with over 450 base stats was a breath of fresh air. Seviper totaled 11 resets, 5 of which were against Flannery, mainly because I got stubborn and wanted to pull off the win with a Mimic strategy. Also, the league would have been a first try sweep if it wasn't for an unlucky crit at the end. But nonetheless, Seviper finished with a score of 91, the highest on the list so far. Unsurprising when you consider Seviper has 100 base attack and special attack, along with some excellent coverage. The only thing I didn't like about the run was that I was forced to 2v2 against Tate and Liza. Doesn't matter how strong it is, a poison type in the Psychic Gym is gonna have a hard time. Okay, let's see what we have left. From here onward, I'll be using the video that's uploaded on the channel as a reference, since they all clearly show the number of resets needed against each opponent. So, let's continue with another starter, Mudkip. I like Mudkip. and it had some great fights with unique and cool strategies, but a slow, pure water type with a barely average special attack is bound to not go very far. It's been a couple of years since I played this run, but I still remember how awful it was to get past Watson, a swagger lottery that cost me 43 resets. Of course, only the first 20 have an impact on the score, but still. The rest of the game was honestly not so bad, just a reset or two here and there, but then the Pokémon League crushed every remaining hope of bringing home a decent score. Over 20 resets versus Sydney, 19 versus Phoebe, 6 versus Glacia, 18 at Drake, and Wallace caused 14 more of them. In the video I state that after something like 100 resets at the Pokémon League, I decided to save before Wallace. So, to be consistent with the score, I should replay the Pokémon League without saving before the 20th reset against each opponent. But you'll have to forgive me if I don't do that here. Maybe someday I'll revisit this run and I'll update the score, but for now I leave it as it is, a bitter 22.8. So I guess Trico wasn't the worst starter after all, but can it be the best? Torchic was my go-to starter as a kid, and when it came to these solo runs, I expected it to be the best performing one. And in a way, I was right. If we look at the run, we see that one of Torchic's worst opponents was Roxanne, but he managed to get past her after only 6 resets thanks to, believe it or not, Focus Energy. Yeah, Focus Energy was such a great move to have in the early game and had its chance to shine even in the Winona battle. Furthermore, thanks to Torchic's great special attack and strong stab moves, I was allowed to build some very solid strategies around Blaze. And even if I didn't manage to win against Etaliza in a 2v1, the run was incredible. My favorite starter was turning out to be also the best one, and having access to reversal just in time for the Pokémon League made possible to have a guaranteed sweep versus Sydney, Phoebe and Glacia. But an issue came up. 2 issues to be precise: Drake and Wallace. Drake was so brutal that despite relying on hidden power for some ice coverage, it took me 38 resets to win once. And after that, the only plausible way to win against Wallace was a disgusting double team plus leftover setup, which still took 11 resets before working out. Basically, Torchic lost over 55 points in the last 2 battles of the run. Add the fact that hidden power was needed 6 times, and you understand the reason why a great run like this got dragged down to a score of 10.4. Honestly, I had no idea the starters would have placed like this in the final ranking, but looking back at those runs closely, I think the score reflects quite well the respective performances, even if I hate seeing Torchic so down the list. Spiel was surprising. Every time I play a slow Pokémon, I prepare myself to an extra tough run, but this round friend just didn't care. Despite the abysmal speed, it was able to exploit Anchor quite a lot, and it even embraced its slowness with some devastating core setups. What surprises me the most is not the number of resets needed, which is only 20, but the fact that this number could have been single digit if not for some very bad RNG, especially at the Pokémon League. It sucks that Spiel wasn't able to pull off the 2v1 at the most tip gym and had to use Substitute quite a lot in the endgame, but with only a single hidden power usage against Glacia, the final score is a whopping 76, on par with Bacon. On a whole other league when compared to the other ice type I played, despite having a total base stat a bit lower than Snorunt. I think it's obvious Zangoose is king here, and if we take a look at its run, it's clear how there's just no competition at all. Source Dance plus Tap Slash and Return were so strong that I didn't even have to breed more Zangoose to reach the Pokémon League. And once I got there, instead of the usual team of 5 Pokémon, I went in with just one, which was able to completely destroy every opponent thanks to some cool Flail Pomac Berries shenanigans. No hidden power were used, no substitute, no nothing. Zangoose even pulled off the 2v1 against Titaniza, although I'll admit I got lucky there. All this with not even a single reset. I don't know if any other Pokémon will ever be able to pull off a perfect run, so looks like Zangoose will stay up there for a while, with its untouchable score of 120. If I had to choose a favorite run, the Skitty one would be it. By far. Like, to determine Skitty's score I had to check that video again, and I myself ended up rewatching it entirely due to how fun were the strategies used. In case you haven't seen it and you want to check it out, all I'm gonna say here is that Skitty managed to win keeping the reset counter under 20, and that assist is the coolest move in the game. Even without pulling off the 2v1 against Titaniza, Skitty ends with a score of 82.8. A solid third place, only behind 2 Pokémon with nearly double its base stats. Bug Pokémon are not very good in earlier generations, especially the ones you have access to early on. Things like Dustox and Beautifly usually don't last long in the player's team, so I decided to try them in my solo runs to see how good or bad they actually were and which one was the best. And I have to say, Dustox did great. A defensive Pokémon with Shield Dust and a healing move makes for a lot of reliable strategies. Silverwind was also very fun to use, and it was cool to play around a 10% Omnibus chance with some proper setups, although some battles were very long. I still have nightmares about Winona's Skarmory refusing to die and eventually falling to a desperate struggle. Literally. Anyway, as a poison type, Dustox had no chance of winning the 2v1 at the Psychic Gym, but compensated quite a bit with a minimal usage of Substitute and only one hidden power at the very end. The reset total was 22 for a score of 80. Right below Skitty, but not enough to enter the podium. Before uploading the Skitty run, I made my little community guess which Pokémon was better between the cat and Whismur. The poll favored Whismur, but after seeing Skitty's score, I think nobody expects Whismur to place higher. In fact, Whismur struggled a lot, which is to be expected given how weak it is. But still, and I have no way to sugarcoat it, the endgame of the Whismur run was the worst thing I have ever done in Pokémon. It was so frustrating, it made me feel the urgency to better define my no resets between Elite Four members policy. All I'm gonna say here is that by the end, the reset counter had 3 digits, and the first wasn't a 1, or a 2. I'll make an effort to say one positive thing about that run. Whismur didn't use hidden power at all thanks to its very wide coverage. Still, that didn't save it from going below 0 with a score of -24. The last Pokémon we are gonna rank is Beautifly, so we are about to see if Dustox was really the better bug as many of you predicted. Let's go in order for this one. Despite a 4 times weakness to Rock, Beautifly has an easier Rock Scent thanks to Absorb and managed to get past the first gym with only 1 reset. The next scary fight is Watson, but thankfully that only took 7 resets. So for now we are about even. And just as Dustox, Beautifly has to reset once against Winona and twice versus Titaniza. One might expect Beautifly to underperform, me included, but no. Up to the Pokémon League, the 2 Pokémon have basically the same amount of resets. But when it comes to the Pokémon League, we have a clear winner. And that is Beautifly. With only 5 resets, most of which were caused by a wrong strategy I was using against PB that was later corrected, Beautifly dominates the endgame. But at the cost of using hidden power a lot, for a total of 5 times. So what's the score? Well, that would be 72. If it wasn't that Beautifly managed to 2v1 at the Psychic Gym. That's a plus 15, so we are looking at a big score of 87. The underdog enters the podium. So here's the final ranking. It's very satisfying to see all the hours I poured into these runs in a single image, and I hope it was enjoyable to follow me through all of them. I surely had a lot of fun. Let me know what you think about the score system I came up with, and if you want to see more ranking videos. I'm thinking I could update the ranking every 5 or 10 runs, I don't know. Anyway, for now, nothing else to say, so you have a nice day. And as for me, back to theory crafting.